Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our event this evening, Academic Fellowships in Parliament. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing. I'm the Corporate Events Manager for London South Bank University. Before we start, I'm just going to take you through some housekeeping. We are using Zoom webinar, and you'll see there's several functions below you, which are the chat box, and we encourage you to share your thoughts and comments in the chat box during the event. There's also the Q&A box, so I'd like to ask you to reserve any questions you have for the Q&A box, and we'll work our way through those shortly. You'll notice that I have enabled closed captioning, which is the subtitles that are appearing on your screen right now. We do enable those in the interest of inclusivity and accessibility, but if you don't wish to see them, you can hide them by clicking the little up arrow next to the CC Live transcript button. And we will, as I say, we will work our way through questions a little later. Everyone on your screen right now is who you'll be meeting over the course of this hour, so they'll give you a wave. And you'll hear from each of them. And if you have any questions from them, please let us know who the question is for. Finally, I'd like to ask you to keep conversation kind and respectful, and whether in person or virtually, LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion and acceptance, and we believe that everyone should be treated with respect, dignity and courtesy. That's all from me. I'll hand over to my colleague Tyrion for a bit of an intro and some scene setting. Tyrion, over to you.
Hello, thank you very much for coming, Jackie, and welcome to this very cosy seminar. We deliberately wanted it to be quite small because we wanted it to be interactive, and we wanted for it to be like sort of a depth as well as the breadth of knowledge and experience. So I just want to extend my thanks to everybody in the virtual room today, all of whom were former colleagues of mine when I was on my fellowship in Parliament, and to say that I know that you've all got really busy schedules, and that you've really made the effort to take the time out of that to support me in both the organisation of this event and also for presenting today. So thank you very much, all of you, for that. I'm not going to introduce you all personally now. I'll let you do that yourselves. But I think we're going to start with Sarah, who's going to give us a little bit of an oversight about the knowledge exchange in Parliament, and then hand over to Neil, who's going to sort of coordinate the whole thing. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Tyrion, and I'll just get my slides up. So hopefully my technological expertise isn't going to let me down. Can someone give me a nod if they can see the slides? Fantastic, great. So thank you so much, Tyrion, first of all, for the invite to come and talk at the event today and to talk about the fellowships that we do in Parliament. It's really great to be here with you and with colleagues and with Helen, who is another one of our fellows. So my name's Sarah Foxon, and I'm Knowledge Exchange Lead in the UK Parliament. I lead a small team, which is the Knowledge Exchange Unit, and we're really there to connect Parliament with the research community. So I'm just briefly going to talk you through a bit about what we do in the Knowledge Exchange Unit and give you a bit of an oversight of the fellowships and how we run our fellowship scheme before we dive into the real life experiences of Tyrion and Helen and colleagues from the House. So if I just move on. So this is us, the Knowledge Exchange Unit. As I said, our role is to strengthen and support the exchange of information and expertise between Parliament and the research community. So that's to get information flowing in both directions, both from Parliament out, so Parliament's evidence needs, and from the research community in, so research evidence, which Parliament can use in its scrutiny, legislation and debate. So to support that activity, we do a number of different things within the Knowledge Exchange Unit. We do a lot of training. So previously we've done in-person training, and we run various webinars on different topics around engaging with Parliament. So from participating, working with a select committee, to how to engage if you're an early career researcher or a PhD student. We've got a number of webinars that are recorded and are available online. We also have, as well as those, we have a series of how-to guides and resources, so information to support researchers to feed their research into different parts of Parliament, so be that select committees, libraries, Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, or other parts of Parliament, for example, participation or the Restoration and Renewal Programme, or other areas too. Another key thing that we do is we communicate out opportunities for researchers to engage with Parliament in those different departments and teams that I've mentioned. And we do that through our Twitter account at UKParl_research and through roundups. And so those are weekly roundups which go out both to knowledge brokers, so intermediaries working in higher education, and to researchers direct themselves. Another key thing we do is we support fellowships. So we run the fellowship program, of which Tyrion has been a part and Helen is a part. And that's all about bringing academics into Parliament to support and strengthen Parliament's activity. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second, but just to finish off, the other main activities that we're doing in the Knowledge Exchange Unit to help researchers such as yourselves engage with Parliament is providing support and advice. So that might be helping you understand parliamentary processes or simply connecting you with the right person in Parliament to hear about your research. And then finally, something else we do, which isn't direct knowledge exchange, but which we see as really important, is we engage very closely with kind of higher education policy and decisions and activities and priorities in higher education. So by which I mean we work very closely with Research England around REF and future research assessment programme, and around the knowledge exchange framework, and around sector-led activity like the Knowledge Exchange Concordat, because we know it's really important that parliamentary engagement is recognised and rewarded in higher education. And we really want to support academics to feel that their engagement with us is valued. So that's what we do in the Knowledge Exchange Unit. I want to now just briefly talk you through the Parliamentary Academic Fellowship Scheme. So kind of the objectives and then more of the practicalities of it. So the fellowship scheme, we first piloted it in 2016 and had a successful evaluation, so we've continued running it. We've got several objectives of the scheme. The first one is to promote knowledge and public understanding of Parliament, so to help people outside of Parliament understand more about the role of Parliament and how it works. Secondly, it's to support parliamentary offices to expand their engagement with academic stakeholders, to enable Parliament's work to be enriched, and to enable academics to promote their work within Parliament. It's a way for us to provide Parliament with the resources to support its work and allow it to benefit from research. And that's including in ways that might not have been previously considered, so bringing a different perspective from the research sector. It's also there to enable projects to be undertaken that wouldn't have been otherwise possible due to capacity or resource constraints. So it enables us to take on activities where perhaps we don't have specialist skills, but there are academic experts who do, so they're able to take forward work to support Parliament. And then finally, the final objective of the scheme is to grow our alumni network of fellows who can help raise awareness around Parliament's use of research and participate in outreach and engagement activities. So we're certainly meeting that objective today with this event, which Tyrion has very kindly organised. So that's what we're trying to achieve through the scheme. I'll just talk you through now briefly what the scheme kind of looks like. So there are two kinds of academic fellowship calls which we put out. There are directed calls, and that's where we issue projects from Parliament. So a team in Parliament has identified a need for an academic fellow. And then there are open calls, and that's where we invite academics to propose a project to Parliament, to a team in Parliament. And then from that initial proposal, if it's taken forward, there's a phase of co-development with parliamentary staff where a project is developed, which will be of benefit to Parliament, although the original idea will have come from the academics, so from outside, from the research sector. So that's the options. Who are fellowships for? Important question. So fellowships are open to academics or knowledge exchange staff who are employed in a UK university. They are for academics who do have a PhD or an equivalent level of experience. For those who are doctoral students, so PhD students, we do have a completely different series of fellowships, and more information is available about those online, but we won't talk about those today. But these ones are really for academics from postdoc upwards, and there we really do mean early career upwards. So there's no lower limit. Anyone from PhD who's got a PhD upwards can apply right through to professor level. And then what we do ask is that, because this is a really strong, concrete, tangible opportunity for academics to have impact with their research, the way we run it is funding. We encourage academics to seek funding from the home institution, particularly from impact budgets or knowledge exchange budgets, but we're also open to academics bringing along funding from perhaps a research network, charitable learning society, or professional association funding. And that's really, I've just spotted a typo, sorry, there should be 2 S's in that. And that's really funding to enable to buy out the academics' time if they need to do that, or to support pay for expenses if they travel down to London as part of their fellowship. So that's who the fellowships are for. We'll just move on now to very briefly talk about what the fellowships look like. So the really great thing about the Parliamentary Academic Fellowship Scheme is it's really diverse, and all sorts of fellowships are possible. So it's not one size fits all. So they can range from a project which lasts a few months to a project which lasts a year. And actually, once a fellow is in place, we can extend that fellowship up to 2 years. And very often we do see that fellowships are extended. They can be from part-time, so perhaps 1 day a week, to more intense, so maybe up to 2 or 3 days a week, or even more than that, depending on the availability of the academic. They can be remote, so they could be conducted 100% remote, as we've seen pretty much through the pandemic, or it might be that the fellow conducts a lot more of their activity on the estate. And these are all things which can be discussed with the potential supervisor. Then we're really open to allowing a fellowship share, a bit like a job share. So a fellow could do their own project or conduct a project individually, but we also welcome joint applications, or we welcome applicants to say they would be happy to be paired with another fellow to make that more of an accessible option for those who have got less time. Fellowships can take place in lots of different parts of Parliament, so being attached to committees, or library sections in the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, or other parts of the House. And then there are all sorts of different kinds of projects which can take place. So fellows might conduct research projects, they might carry out briefing work, so writing or supporting the drafting of documents, of briefings, either in the library or committees or post. Capacity building, bringing technical or specialist support, so specific skills or expertise, bringing that into the House where we don't have that specifically. So then I just wanted to finish with talking about upcoming opportunities. So what does this mean for you? So if it's something that you'd like to explore, what are your options? So at the moment, we've got about 30 fellows running around Parliament, mainly virtually and metaphorically rather than physically, but we've got 30 of them across the House. So we conduct ongoing monitoring and evaluation, and we're just gearing up our evaluation of the scheme now. So it's really important to us that it works both for Parliament and for the fellow, and that it's a positive, impactful experience. At the same time, we're also working to streamline the administration of the scheme and to work to make sure that the scheme is more open and inclusive. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We're working on that currently in these months, but what we're intending to do is issue some directed calls in early 2020. So we're working with colleagues across the House to determine their research evidence fellowship needs at the moment and in these next couple of months. And we'll be intending to publish and issue those calls in early 2022. So lots of ways you can keep up to date and make sure you don't miss out on those calls when they come out. Firstly, you can follow us on Twitter, where we'll be launching those calls. Secondly, you can sign up to our weekly roundup of opportunities. So the link is there, and make sure that that gets shared with you. So that will list the fellowship opportunities as well as all the opportunities we find to work with Parliament. So select committee calls for evidence or calls to contribute to briefings, or you can take a look at our web pages. So it's a question of watching this space and being ready for 2022 to see what options there are for you. And with that, I will pause there, but look forward to discussion and questions towards the end of the event.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Next up, we have Sally Lipscombe, Domestic Abuse Specialist for the Home Affairs Section of the House of Commons Library. Sally, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Neil said, I am the Domestic Abuse Specialist in the library. I also cover criminal law, crime more generally. I'm here with my colleague Jenny Brown, who covers policing, and I am going to talk to you a little bit about what the Library Research Service is, what we do, how we work with MPs, and then just a quick run through of how Helen and Tyrion as academic fellows have both contributed to the briefing output from the Library Research Service. So I am also just going to try and share my screen with you. So I'm going to cover what the library is, what parliamentary research we do, and then, as I said, a practical example of how we have worked together to brief on domestic abuse issues. So the library, we provide MPs and their staff with accurate and impartial information to support them in their parliamentary duties, so that whether that's speaking in the chamber, dealing with a constituent, campaigning on something, all sorts of ways that MPs carry out their parliamentary duties, we're there to provide them with the information they need to do that. Two main elements to the library. The first is the sort of traditional physical library. MPs can access physical resources, electronic resources. Looks very much as you would expect the House of Commons library to look, lots of leather armchairs and books and ladders and things. And then the bit that Jenny and I work in is the research service, which provides briefing material to MPs and their staff. So within the research service, there's around 80 of us. We're split into 8 subject teams, which between us, we cover every subject under the sun that an MP might want to ask for briefing on. We are a mixture of people with specialist skills and knowledge, and then people hired as general sort of policy researchers who build up a specialism perhaps while they're in post. I am an ex-solicitor, so I trained as a solicitor. We have solicitors, barristers, economists, statisticians, medical doctors, people who have worked as teachers, social workers, all sorts of people who have come from all sorts of walks of life with specialist skills that they then are using in the work we do in the library. And then, unlike select committees, which tend to mirror Whitehall departments, our specialisms are sort of grouped more thematically. So the Home Affairs section covers Home Office policy areas like police, like crime, but we also cover quite a lot of work from the Ministry of Justice. We cover women inequalities. We also cover things like charities, culture, media, sport, consumers, insolvency. So we're quite a broad section. Other sections are a bit more specialist, but it varies depending on the policy. So the parliamentary research we do, the main characteristic is that we are writing specifically for a parliamentary audience. So that's mainly MPs, but also increasingly their staff, those who work with them. Our work is driven by the demands of Parliament, so the parliamentary business calendar, what debates are coming up, what legislation the government has introduced, things like that. So we try and do horizon scanning to help predict likely areas of political interest. So things we might look at include the Queen's speech, what bills are in the Queen's speech. We might look at law commission reviews. There's quite a lot going on in my portfolio with criminal law, things like hate crime, sharing of indecent images, that can generate parliamentary interest. We look at government, department consultations, that sort of thing. So we have an idea of where the parliamentary interest is likely to be before we hit the points of demand. And although we work chiefly for MPs and their staff, there is an increasing level of direct public engagement. There is now a library Twitter account which pushes our work out on Twitter. Our work is also published on the internet. When I joined the library in 2008, a lot of our work was only on the intranet, so that only parliamentarians and their staff could access it. That's now very public, and that is an increasing part of how we our writing is on the assumption that actually members of the public have a justifiable interest in the work of Parliament and the briefing that we're producing. The briefing material that we produce has to take account of the fact there is no standard job description for an MP. Different MPs are MPs in different ways. Some MPs are campaigning MPs, other MPs are very dedicated constituency MPs. We support front bench MPs who have, particular policy portfolios. So every MP will come to the library with different research needs. We have 3 core tasks in supporting MPs. So the first is scrutinising government, whether that's campaigning for change, maybe asking a PQ, that sort of thing. The other is passing legislation. So whether it's amendments to government bills that have come in or taking forward private members' bills as backbench MPs, we do a lot of briefing work in connection with legislation. And then the last is with representing their constituents. So if something comes through in a constituency postbag and an MP needs help understanding the issue, understanding maybe the law, what they can do to help practically as an MP, they may contact us and ask for a bespoke briefing on how to deal with constituency casework. So that's the other type of briefing work that we produce. We meet those needs in 2 main ways. So one is publicly available research, which is published on the Commons Library website. So the link is on there. We do legislative briefing papers on bills. We do general policy briefings on areas of policy that are likely to be of parliamentary interest. We do something called insights, which are short 800-word blog posts effectively on sort of topical issues. And then we have casework guides for constituency workers who need more practical help with where to help constituents, where to direct people to. And the other response we have is confidential bespoke responses to individual requests from MPs. So some of these may be policy requests if an MP is working on a particular campaign or wants to put an amendment down to a bill. And these may be constituency inquiries where a constituent needs help with something, but those are sort of commissioned pieces of research from individual MPs, which are confidential and done specifically for that MP. These are the main principles of how we conduct our research and what we're expected to produce. There is a Parliamentary Research handbook, which I've put the link up to there. It's available on the internet if anyone is interested. So the main principles: impartial. MPs are obviously bombarded with all sorts of campaign group emails, and our role is to help them navigate through, what they're being sent from vested interest groups or particular campaign groups with particular views on things. Clear and authoritative. We need to write in an accessible way. MPs, generally speaking, aren't specialists in particular policy areas, so we need to make technical, legal things, easily understandable. It needs to be timely. There's often pressures because of the parliamentary calendar. It needs to be relevant, and as I say, it needs to be confidential. Quite often MPs need a space where they can commission research on controversial policy issues in a confidential way, so that they can use that to sort of reach their viewpoint on something without people necessarily knowing that they are researching a particular issue. So confidentiality can be a very important part of what we do with our bespoke responses. Just to finish off with an example from my portfolios, this is domestic abuse. So I have done a number of legislative briefings on the domestic abuse bill, which is now the Act. To support those bill briefing papers, there are various standalone papers on particular elements of domestic abuse policy, which are likely to be of particular parliamentary interest, either because of business in the House or constituency issues. So some of the constituency issues are things like family law and domestic abuse, support for victims, and then from a sort of more parliamentary perspective, things like coercive behaviour and the Istanbul Convention, which are papers that Tyrion and Helen have worked on. And that goes back to Sarah's point about academic fellows increasing our capacity to produce briefings. Those are briefings that I would have liked to produce, but don't have time for with the bill briefings and things. So it's been really helpful to have the extra capacity in this particular portfolio to produce those papers that otherwise wouldn't have been written. There are some short insights on key developments. So those are the 800-word blog posts. So we have a couple of recent ones on domestic abuse in the pandemic, and Tyrion wrote the most recent one of those. There's a number of constituency casework resources on victim support, so directing victims to particular organisations, and then ongoing bespoke responses to MPs who contact us directly, looking for help with either individual policy requests or casework requests. So that's just an example of how we would work in a particular subject area. And that, I think, is all I was going to say.
Thank you very much, Sally. We'll be back with you shortly. I would now like to welcome Helen McCabe, Academic Fellow for the Home Affairs Select Committee. Helen, over to you.
Hi everybody, I'm Helen McCabe from the University of Nottingham in my day job. But yeah, very excited to be here. Thanks again, Tyrion, for the invitation. So one of the nice things about the Parliamentary Fellowship Scheme is that, especially while we've been remote, the team, Sarah and her colleagues, have managed to buddy us up, and Tyrion and I were buddies because we're working on, broadly speaking, violence against women and girls. And that's been a really, really nice element of my experience. So I guess it's a chance to say thank you in person to Sally, Sarah and the team, and also to say thank you to Tyrion, very friendly buddy in the fellowship system. It's been great to get to know you. It's a shame we didn't manage to meet up actually in Parliament, perhaps even in the Parliamentary Library, and sit in one of those amazing armchairs that Sally was just showing us. So I applied through the open call. I applied to work with the select committee. I work in, broadly speaking, well, in a politics department. I'm also in a centre called the Rights Lab at the University of Nottingham. It's one of our beacons of research excellence, and we are working on issues to do with modern slavery, aiming towards the Sustainable Development Goal of ending modern slavery by 2030. And I lead the work there on forced marriage. And when the open call came out, I just won a grant from the Economic and Social Research Council to look at the impact of COVID-19 on forced marriage in the UK. And I think kind of thought that perhaps the government's response to COVID would be something the Home Affairs Select Committee might be looking at over the next 12 to 18 months. Obviously, actually, there's been a big report come out. It's not come out from the committee I'm working with. You'll know that came out in the last couple of days from Science and Technology Committee and Health Committee. And when I got into discussions with the chair, with the clerk of the committee, I think that's where what Sarah was talking about earlier about co-design came in. She had a word with the chair, and she already knew about the priorities for the select committee. They've been laid out already, and she said probably not going to be looking at COVID, but we are going to be looking at all these other things. Forced marriage has got could have things to do with that. Would you be willing to talk a bit more or work a bit more broadly on more general issues to do with violence against women and girls? And I said yes, that'd be a great opportunity for me. And so we co-designed a new project. In the main, initially, it was going to be sort of supporting members of the committee with kind of background understandings about forced marriage, data I found in my projects, general sense about what the law is. As this is an issue that the Home Affairs Select Committee has a remit over, but it has broadened out, especially as the committee's now launched a big multi-month, possibly multi-year inquiry into violence against women and girls. So I guess one of the things I've learned from my fellowship is that people don't really know what select committees do. So I have a politics background, so I did know quite a bit about the workings of the British Parliament, but I've learned a lot more since I started on this fellowship. And I'm now much handier at finding my way around where bills and acts of Parliament are kept online and how to find things in Hansard. And all the different kinds of evidence is given by select committees and where you find that. But a number of people have commented on things I've shared online, showing they sort of think the Home Affairs Select Committee is the same as the Home Office. And actually, the Home Affairs Select Committee is responsible for kind of holding the Home Office to account. So they ask for evidence from the people who work in the Home Office. They can question the Home Secretary and the permanent private secretaries for the Home Office. And they are often sending letters saying, can you answer this, or this policy doesn't look like it's being implemented, or can you tell us whether this policy just announced is actually going to be legal? So they do a really important job, not only scrutinising legislation, which perhaps we're more familiar about with committees, but also scrutinising the actual actions of the government. It's obviously a multi-party committee. Chairs are picked by MPs themselves in the House of Parliament, so the government doesn't have any say over that, and so there is a great deal of independence in terms of doing this scrutinising job that they have to do. I didn't realise how many people worked to support a committee, how many civil servants there were. It was a really interesting thing to learn. I think I had thought the civil service mainly being attached to the executive branch, so to the government, And actually there's a whole host of people working inside Parliament to support the work of the committee. And so I've just joined the team really, and I'm doing the kind of thing that Sally was just saying the library does, but on a much smaller scale, trying to help provide extra information, help add capacity and some expertise where I've got it to ongoing inquiries. So I've been working on background notes for MPs, I've helped draft letters they might want to send. I am working on an inquiry brief for upcoming inquiries, doing lots of background research and writing précis of really big reports that MPs might want to read to be able to ask informed questions, but might not have time to read the whole 100-page report themselves. So I do a quick summary. And it's been fascinating to learn how it all works, and particularly how fast it all works. I think academia moves quite slow in lots of ways, and it took a very long time to go through the application process for this. It was much more academic timescale, and then suddenly, you think that they're going to hear evidence on X on Wednesday, and something happens over the weekend, some big policy announcement or some big political event, and suddenly the committee are hearing evidence on a completely separate topic than the one you were expecting. And it's amazing how fast the support staff work to get everything in order, and amazingly how fast the MPs must be able to read all the briefs that get sent to them. Must be only hours sometimes before a big inquiry where they're hearing evidence. I guess I'm lucky because I'm funded by the ESRC for this project, and that meant that I could ask or could suggest that I did the fellowship for a whole year, which means that maybe I'll even make it down to London and meet all my colleagues before the end of my fellowship, which should be the end of February. I think initially we thought I'd be going down every fortnight for a couple of days a week, which sadly hasn't happened yet, but it might happen in the future. And then I've also, as Sally mentioned, been doing some really interesting, for me anyway, work with the library, again, an extension of what I've done before in terms of writing for a new audience, and much more in-depth knowledge about responses to the Istanbul Convention than I had before I started this particular project. So I think that's probably everything from me, but happy to answer any questions that come up in the chat. And I think I'm handing back over to Tyrion.
Thank you so much, Helen. We'll be back with you shortly. I'd now like to welcome Tyrion. Tyrion Havard is Associate Professor in Social Work in the School of Allied Health at LSBU. And then we were also joined by Jenny Brown, Library Specialist, Home Affairs Section of the House of Commons Library. I'll hand over to you both.
Hello, everyone. Tyrion's got a mute on.
Yes, I haven't done this before. Sorry, I was on mute then. I think you're going first, right, Jen? And then
That's right. Yes. Just to extend my thanks to Tyrion for inviting me to this event, and it's a pleasure to be here and to talk to everyone on the call. And to have myself recorded, which is a bit of a new thing for me. So I shall be not watching this when it goes up on YouTube. I'm going to talk a little bit about the specific work that Tyrion and I have done together on a briefing for on serious violence for MPs. So I'll start by explaining, why we need this briefing, and it sort of build on a bit of what Sally's talked about already. I'm then going to move on to explain why it was difficult for me to meet this need without the support of Tyrion and academic support. And then I'm going to sort of reflect a bit on the challenges that we've experienced trying to work on this together, but also, of course, on the successes, and there are plenty. So I'll start, as I said, by explaining why we needed this briefing. So tackling serious violence, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, has been a key priority for the Home Office over the past three years or so. And as already been mentioned, one of Parliament's main jobs is to scrutinise the work of government, and so members need to be able to scrutinise the Home Office's work on tackling serious violence appropriately, and they need that information about what the government's approach actually is, and some sort of comment on the evaluation of that approach in order to do that job of scrutinising effectively. But also, particularly with this area, many members have a special interest in serious youth violence. And I think this is likely because of the nature of county lines offending. It's often very localised, and we see members who perhaps in areas been badly affected with county lines a new type of criminality that they weren't used to. So this has been something that members have been, particularly in a sort of constituency-based role, extremely interested in. And that is reflected in parliamentary activity. So we've had many Westminster Hall debates. This is the House's second chambers where members can bring special interests for debate, or on issues connected with serious violence and county lines over the past 3 or 4 years. So why was it difficult for me to meet this information need without academic support? Well, before Tyrion joined us, my coverage on this area, on the response to serious violence was, and I've put in my notes here, bitty, which I think is the academic term. So I'd written plenty about serious violence, but mostly in response to specific parliamentary events, responding to the sort of needs of members as and when it arises. So people might be aware that there was a big piece of legislation in 2019, the Offensive Weapons Act. So I briefed on that bill. There's now a new bill in this space called the Police Crime Sentencing Courts Bill. We've published a series of briefings on that. And as I've mentioned, it's come up frequently in Westminster Hall. So we would write briefing as and when it came up in Westminster Hall. But partly because of the pressures of parliamentary time, I haven't been able to sort of tie this work together and bring it together in one space so members could see how the government's approach has been developing. So that was a big issue that we just didn't have the capacity to bring together the work that we'd already been doing on this issue. But I think more sort of fundamentally why academic support was particularly important was, I obviously read and write about policing and crime every day, but I do go out and meet with stakeholders, and I have been in police cars, as part of my role, but I don't have that on the ground understanding as good as I'd like, that understanding of the challenges faced by young people involved in county lines and young people vulnerable to county lines. And Tyrion was, and as I go on to say, Tyrion was able to bring that sort of practical experience and knowledge that is very difficult to get from sitting behind a desk in Westminster. And also, as sort of Sally touched on, the library has a one-person specialist model. So we do work in teams that are, where the subject matters are connected. But I work on policing. That's my specialism. And that sometimes can lead to some challenges when dealing with issues like county lines that are cross different parts of government and also intersectional. So that sort of perspective from academia, sort of looking more wholly at an issue, was helpful to sort of complement the single specialist model that we have in the library. So essentially, this project just gave me the time and the space and the challenge from Tyrion to sort of draw together all this work and bring a new perspective to the way we were approaching briefing members on county lines. So I'm going to just talk about the successes and challenges, and I want to end on a high, so I'll start with the challenges. As much as lots of our work in Parliament moves at a very great speed, particularly when it's in response to parliamentary events, some of our briefing on bigger policy issues can take a long time because there isn't an immediate deadline for like a parliamentary event that sort of means that we have to publish it by a certain time. And briefing work can be therefore slow, and that can be at points frustrating, particularly because the nature of what's going on in Parliament can sometimes get in the way of us working on these briefings. So that has been a challenge. And the biggest challenge, I think, is remote working, has already been touched upon by Helen. It's been can be very isolating, especially when you're working in a research role. But we are hopefully past it now, and in future academic fellows will be able to spend a lot more time on the parliamentary estate, which would be great. Successes, definitely knowledge sharing. I hope that Tyrion's learned a lot with us. I'm sure she'll talk about it in a bit, but I have certainly had my eyes opened to other sources of information on this subject, and been able to talk and discuss with Tyrion some of the issues around the area, which has really helped me ingrain my knowledge. And that's of course led to the briefing being drawing on a wider base of evidence, which has just made it better. So that's been a huge success. So I'll pass it to Tyrion to sort of round off this discussion of this brief.
You're on mute.
On mute again. Thanks, Jenny. That was really brilliant. Thank you so much. So I guess I'm going to try and complement a lot of what Jen has said. I think the points that Jen has made are very similar to mine, but maybe from a different perspective. And just to clarify that Sally and Jen were both colleagues of mine in the library, but Jen was my supervisor. And Helen's explained that we were both fellows together and we buddied up. So I think, so for me, I was really keen when I saw the open call to come out for Parliament. For me, it felt like a shot to nothing, really. I had nothing to lose, but I really didn't expect that I'd be selected or anything. But I was really driven because I've done quite a lot of research on violence against women and girls. And I really didn't want to be sitting on a shelf and gathering dust. For me, I think the research that I do is really important. I'm very driven by a desire to make a difference for people who are struggling or are vulnerable. And I want to sort of protect women, girls and children generally. And so I really wanted to, and have done for a very long time, want to influence sort of the public and government priorities to make a difference to the lives of ordinary people. So I wanted the opportunity to put women and girls on the agenda as well. My research and conversations with various survivors showed very clearly to me that very often what happens is that the experiences of boys and girls, the similarity between boys and girls is recognised, but the differences seldom are. And so I really wanted to put a spotlight on those differences and use survivors' voices in my own research to highlight that maybe policy needs to change a little bit, or that there needs to be adaptations to policies, to practice, to implementation of interventions. To accommodate that, to make sort of it more impactful, really. And I also felt the need to make a link between my research, what people tell me that informs my research, and also the government approach, so to have that kind of triangle thing. And I know that select committees often invite survivors in to talk, but sort of the people I speak to for my research aren't necessarily the people who would put themselves forward to give evidence. And so that was my drive, really. And what I learned on the fellowship was a much better understanding of Parliament and government, the relationship between the two. I've sort of sat in a few briefings in Parliament in the past and was told that there was a difference and told what those differences were. But I think being involved in the fellowship has really made that very clear to me. And in fact, I was on an open day on Saturday and somebody made that confusion between Parliament and government, and I was able very confidently and eloquently, I hope, explain those differences to her. And so because I had a better understanding of the role of Parliament and how it related to government and why it was so important, it sort of influenced my approach to everything that I do. And sort of, you know, Parliament is completely separate to government, and one of the roles it has is to hold government to the government to account and things like that. And so that wasn't something I really clocked, I think, before I started my fellowship. And so it gave me an insight into the complexities of Parliament. So I was one of those people who didn't really know what a select committee was that Helen was talking about earlier on, and I didn't really know what that was and how it connected to anything else. And so when I went for the open call, I quite struggled to do, because with an open call you have to decide where you want to work, who your host office is going to be, and I really struggled with coming to terms with that and to working out what each department did, how they how they were different from each other, and where was the best fit for me, really. And I think now that's not such a big mystery for me. And I'm quite confident about that. Jen has touched on the changing pace of the work in Parliament, and I know from Helen and from other people involved in select committees how quickly and intense the work can be, and how quickly the agenda changes. And I sort of got a bit of that, but not a huge amount of that. And so for me, in my role within the library, for me, it felt like time was sort of changing all the time. It wasn't sort of a fixed amount. And so Sally talked earlier on about the Queen's speech being a trigger for lots of work. And so it was agreed that the domestic abuse insight I did around the pandemic would be sort of 12 months on, but because the Queen's speech was coming out, that it would need to coincide with that. And so to go from no idea about an insight at all and then having to produce one in about 2 weeks, so that was quite pressured. But then on the other side, I've done this violence briefing paper with Jen, which sort of had the first draft was finished back in June, but because all sorts of stuff has been coming up, that's sort of been on the back burner a bit more. And so it's not like academia or any other job that I've had really, in the term there's your deadline and you stick to it, because these deadlines can shift all the time. And so that flexibility and responsiveness to that demand has been learning for me, absolutely. Possibly one of the most valuable things I've learned, or the most useful things I've learned, is my writing style. So I've got a different writing style now. So I've learned how to use other people's contributions to make my point, rather than to just come out and say it. And in research, you kind of make a point and then you back it up with evidence, but it's different in Parliament. So the point doesn't have to be direct. It can be subtle or sort of a quiet account. It doesn't have to be in your face. The importance of diplomacy, that's really emphasised on the application form, and I think I really got to understood that the subtleties of that in a very different way. I learned how to weave policy and parliamentary debate into research and the other way around, and how these really can absolutely sit together and feed together. They don't need to be separate things. They should and do and could, influence each other. I really enjoyed the opportunity to feed into reviews like the rape review and the Vogue inquiry that Helen is working on, and I really appreciate the opportunity to put my work out there and to be sort of recognised for my research, and of course to bring recognition to the university here as well. I agree with Jen. I think it's a shame that my that the fellowship did coincide with the lockdown, but that's kind of how it is, and I sort of in a way don't know any different, and lots of people have said that to me sort of during my fellowship there. My response has always been, well, I'd rather have the opportunity in lockdown than to not have it at all. And so I remain really very grateful and thankful for the opportunities that I've been given. I have absolutely no regrets or any barriers or anything negative to report about my experience in Parliament at all. For me, it was the most wonderful experience and arguably the most empowering experience of my professional career. I believe that I've made lots of very good colleagues and relationships that will continue and extend way beyond the fellowship, and that includes you, Helen. So when you come to London, I expect an invitation to parliamentary public houses. And also I just it's just been brilliant. It's just been brilliant. My advice to everybody is just go for it. Do it, try and do it. It's the most bestest thing I've ever done. Okay, and on that, I'm going to close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tyrion. So we've got some time for questions and discussion, actually. So I'm just going to address the first question that's in the chat box from Kathleen. And Tyrion, this is about the bill, and I know that you're happy to answer this. So domestic abuse is not just about the victim. Often the person doing the abusing is suffering in some way. Does your bill recognise that someone who is physically abusing may be suffering from passive aggressive abuse from the so-called victim? We'll address that, and then we'll move on to the academic fellowships. Tyrion?
Okay, so I think, to answer that question, I'm going to draw on my experience as a probation officer when I worked with perpetrators of domestic abuse. And what I'm going to say is that, yes, there's lots of reasons why people abuse, but it's not an excuse for the abuse. And so you know, I've worked with perpetrators that always say, oh, I was drunk at the time, or I was under the influence of drugs at the time. And it's like, okay, that's a factor perhaps, but it's not an excuse. And it's certainly not a reason. And so for me, it's important to look at that, but that's a side issue. That the priority for me has to be the abuse needs to stop. You know, take responsibility, find the help that you need. And, you know, and as a probation officer, I would help people do that. So I'm pleased to see that the emphasis on the bill is to focus on the perpetrator and to hold them accountable. I think it's high time that happens. I think women have been held responsible for their own abuse for far too long, and the challenges that they face in managing the abuse, keeping themselves and their children safe, haven't been recognised anywhere near enough for far too long. So that's my response. Helen, do you want to say anything?
No, I think that response is brilliant.
Thank you. Sarah, I know that you have a question for Tyrion and Helen.
Thank you. That is just so inspiring hearing about all of your experiences. I'm so glad that we've got you both supporting Parliament with your expertise and insights. I think you kind of spoke a bit to this point, Tyrion, but I just wondered if so obviously your research has immensely helped Parliament and our colleagues in Parliament, but to what extent has your experience in Parliament now kind of influenced and shaped how you're going to take your research forward? Has it kind of led to a change in what you think about doing next? And I just wondered if it was kind of reciprocal kind of.
I think for the moment, because I only finished about a month ago, right? So at the moment, I'm writing my first bit, having finished the fellowship, and what's really clear to me is how my approach to writing that bit has really changed. Do you find that as well, Sarah, Helen? But and it's just my approach has really changed. So I'm dipping much more into government policy. I'm looking much more at what's going on politically, feeding that, doing that weaving thing that I talked about earlier on, but bringing that into my bits. So, you know, I've got the academic sort of support, I guess, which I've always used, but sort of they both come hand in hand much more now, and sort of just the way I go about it has changed. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think I have a much clearer understanding now of how Parliament might use research and what kind of outputs parliamentarians might want, and then what government might use and want, and different ways that you might affect and when you might impact, like if there was a specific bill being passed, and then other ways of thinking about how you might get information to parliamentarians. So I think that will affect like how I write. If I write another kind of impact-oriented bill, and obviously bid for funding, obviously they all have to have a strong impact narrative, and I care very much about doing that right. So I think it's really been really helpful for thinking about, yeah, that kind of nuance of what kind of outputs do you want to produce and who would actually benefit from them. And it can be quite a blanket sense of like the government, and actually what you probably do mean is parliamentarians. But I also think, I mean, I didn't know there was a parliamentary library, right? Until I got this job, and part of me is like, why didn't I know when I just finished my PhD? It would have been a great place to go and work. So there's definitely that option. And then, writing, so I work on my previous work before I started working on modern slavery was about a Victorian parliamentarian and political theorist and economist, John Stuart Mill, and I've been writing a piece with a friend about, I mean, randomly, what he had to say about the Irish fishing industry, but fascinating insights into like diving through Hansard, and then I realised I understood all these things that it said in Hansard much better than I would have done before. Like the House dissolved into a committee of a whole committee of itself, and I was like, I know what that means because I work in Parliament. So just it's been really interesting and informative and helpful in all sorts of ways I didn't expect, in terms of lots of different bits. And now I think, there's a whole really exciting book somebody should write about Mill and his time in Parliament, which hasn't been explored very much. He wasn't MP for very long, but it was a big part of his career, and he did lots of really interesting work. So maybe that'll be the next project I could, and maybe Sarah will let me come and write it, like in the library, and find all the bits of Hansard that he speaks in. Now I've made my way through finding, comparing bills side by side from the 1860s. So much fun being an historian.
Thank you both. Thank you for your question, Sarah. We'll try and get through this question, then we'll do one more. If an academic feels they have evidence from their research which they feel should be heard in Parliament, e.g. a select committee, an APPG, a Commons Library team, or a specific MP, what advice would the panelists give them on how best to approach this? And I'll come over to anyone.
I know that there is there's something called the generic papers email address, which we quite often get things forwarded into. I think it's something like papers@parliament.uk. And what we quite often get is contact details and brief kind of CVs almost from academics that go into that email address, and people monitor it centrally and then forward it on to relevant library specialists. I don't know if that's just a library specific email address or if that goes more widely across Parliament, but certainly that's how I hear of academics interested in criminal law and some of the other subjects I cover. It gets forwarded to me from that generic email address. And then if they look like somebody who would be useful for me to talk to, then I've got their details on an email there to get back to. I would say we do get more of those than we are able to respond to, so we don't respond to all of the contacts that are made, but that is one way that they come directly to library researchers, at least. I don't know how it works more widely across Parliament, but that email address for the library.
Also flagging the areas of research interest that posts have just been developing, and then you can sign yourself up to be a researcher who works on one of those, and that is a good way of kind of getting your research noticed. I think there's a slight flaw at the minute, you can't sign up for more than one, and quite a lot of our research cuts across areas of research interest, but hopefully that might change, and then we can be more accessible. You can send things directly to clerks of committee for select committees, or to the chair of committees for select committees. Not guaranteed it'll be read, but certainly if you can follow the select committee on Twitter, you can kind of see what's happening, be in touch and be engaged, and get in touch with them, and that might mean you end up being called to give evidence. Certainly you can submit written evidence in any call for evidence from a select committee. That's really easy, you just do it online. Sometimes there's a questionnaire to fill in, but sometimes it's just like an open Dropbox, or you attach a file, or you put things into a text box, and based on what gets submitted there, sometimes people are also called to give oral evidence, but all of that written evidence gets read and gets synthesized. If it's a select committee that you're looking at, it's harder to contact individual MPs because they're not supposed to kind of take emails from people out in their constituency, but you can obviously always email your own MP about your research, and if that's a way in for that. So that would be my thoughts on the kind of select committee side of things.
Sarah?
I'll just add in there that it's a really interesting point. If you feel, so the question is, if you feel your research should be heard in Parliament, who do you talk to? How do you go out talking to them? But I'd like to throw back out the question and say, why? Why do you want your research to be heard in Parliament? What do you want Parliament to do with your research? I think if you're able to answer that question, that will help you direct you to where you want to engage. So, if it's about raising awareness, then it might be sharing insights with the library or with the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. If it's more about challenging or questioning what the government's doing, then that might be through the committee system where they're scrutinising the government. So I think asking that question, what do I want to achieve by doing this, will really help you think about who you want to get in touch with, because it might also be an APPG, so a special interest group who've got a particular interest in a topic too. I did encourage you to have a look at our web pages, the Knowledge Exchange Unit web pages, which will help you think through who to approach and when and why and how. And that's www.parliament.uk/research-impact. So do take a look there, and we're always happy to hear from researchers in the Knowledge Exchange Unit, and you can get us on KEU, so it's Knowledge Exchange Unit, KEU@parliament.uk.
Thank you very much. And I know we're running over, so just a last quick question, just to round us off. What advice or words of encouragement would you give to colleagues thinking about pursuing an academic fellowship in Parliament? And I'll throw that out again.
I'm just going to say go for it. You've got nothing to lose, go for it.
Helen?
I'd say the same. Like Tyrion said before, I didn't have any expectation that I'd be picked, and it's been a wonderful experience to recommend it to anybody.
Jenny?
Yeah, I think sort of a bit similar to what Sarah just said. I think, yeah, have a think before you send in your application about how it would fit in with our work, and make sure you've got a good understanding of what it is that we're about and what we're doing, the particular team that you're applying to work in, and also just have a real sense of trying to hit the ground running, get the most out of it, because they do fly by, and before you know it, you're having a drink and saying goodbye, and you're like, oh no, it's over. So really be excited and willing to get going, which has obviously been a great part of working with Tyrion, just hands on straight away from the start. So just try and take a bit of Tyrion's enthusiasm with you as well.
Thank you. Sally?
I'd echo what Jenny has just said, and also what Sarah said. I think have a sense of where you see your work fitting into, a particular part of Parliament, and a sense of where your work will feed into that. And it's been really helpful for me, as someone who sits at a desk, head down at my laptop most of the day, to have people from outside of Parliament coming in and talking to them about the subjects I cover and getting more of an outside perspective. The danger of working within the library is you can get quite narrowly focused on Parliament, and actually Parliament isn't a vacuum. It's influenced by all sorts of external places, and we don't always have enough of a relationship with outside academics and experts. So it's been a really useful way to get a bit more outside influence on our briefing work.
Thank you very much. And Sarah, I'll come to you and then hand over to Tyrion for close.
Just all of the above, all of what everyone has said, and I think don't be intimidated. We're very nice people in Parliament. We're approachable, normal human beings. So don't feel like it's not a place for you. It is a place for you. So don't feel intimidated, feel confident to apply.
Yeah, and I just sort of end really just to say that it's thank you again everybody for your time and for coming to this. I think it's really obvious that how friendly everybody is in Parliament, how everybody works together and supports each other, and like I said, it's the best thing that I've ever done, and I look forward to the relationships that I'm going to develop with everybody here. And just thanks so much for all of your time and your commitment, and for particularly to Sally and especially Jenny for shaping me in the way that you did, giving me the opportunities that I had when I was in Parliament, and sort of listening to what I had to say, and having those debates. It was really excellent. Thank you very, very much, and thanks everybody in the audience for coming. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye everyone. Thank you so much.